Thanks for joining us. I'm Randall Bennett. Now, this time around with the economic downturn, we're not going to see a bubble burst like we did back in 2000, but one thing that might come back is the idea of paying for things we take for granted for free on the web. Ulanoff, the editor-in-chief of PC Mag, wrote an editorial today that sparked the idea of the web for free is coming to an end once again. Now, is this really going to happen? Let's ask two experts who have some opinions on the topic with Harry McCracken from Technologizer. Harry, thanks for being with us.
Greetings from Palo Alto.
Also, we have Brian Heater from PC Mag. Brian, thanks for being with us as well.
Twitter's down this hour, so I basically have nothing else to do with my time.
I'm glad you came out to be with us. Better us than anyone else, right? So let's talk about this. Now, Twitter obviously is one case where I don't think anyone's going to be paying for that, but there are some use cases where people have been using web apps that are more useful. People already are paying for things like Flickr, or advanced users of Vimeo are paying for things like that. Harry, do you think that the idea of free web access and free users and free content, do you think that's coming to an end, or do you think that people simply won't stand for it and these companies will just be out of luck?
Well, I think there are two people involved in this business equation, and those are the content providers and the consumers. And I think we will see the people who make content attempt to get people to pay for it just because their business model is breaking down when they have to rely entirely on advertising. I think it's going to be a really tough job to convince consumers to buy stuff on the web, though, simply because almost anything anybody might charge for, there are still going to be good free alternatives. I think probably the best hope for content companies is new platforms like mobile phones and the Kindle. We've certainly seen people be willing to pay for stuff on the iPhone, and the Kindle is something where you pay $10 and up for content, and maybe people who are conditioned not to pay on the web will be more receptive to new platforms and devices.
I mean, I guess that's kind of like the last-ditch hope, right? I mean, if advertising goes away, it really just becomes, let's try these new platforms and see what sticks. Brian, what's your take?
It's a huge problem.
Do you think, Brian, that people, I don't know, first of all, do you believe your boss's take that the end of the free web is coming? I don't know. What's your take?
Well, I mean, he was speaking specifically, at least at the beginning. The reason why he wrote the article was because of this this News Corps announcement. Late last week, the Wall Street Journal came out and said that they were going to be introducing a micropayment plan, which basically, as opposed to the subscription-based service that they've been doing all along, would charge people a small increment of money to look at stories. I think that can work, but in the case of the Wall Street Journal, I think the only way that will work is if they sort of can provide some sort of exclusive content, if they can get scoops and things like that. There are certain things that the Wall Street Journal can still do that your average two-person blog necessarily can't bring to you.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I can't imagine charging for TechVi personally. I'm not sure, Harry, what your take is on Technologizer, but I just can't justify only relying on subscription revenue, because I'm not the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal has a very business-focused audience who kind of hold on to their every word, whereas, I'm begging people to come check this out. I don't know, Harry, as a small blog runner, do you see subscriptions as something realistic for someone in, our situation?
I think it's going to be a long time before people are willing to pay for the sort of stuff we do. I mean, stuff that is absolutely unique, people will pay for. Consumer Reports is the other good example of something that people do pay for, and that's because that's one of the few places where you'll find reviews of refrigerators or air conditioners. But once people are used to getting something for free, telling them that they're going to have to pay for it from now on is a proposition that's awfully tough to make stick.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of hope that maybe someone would develop a donationware model, kind of like NPR, where you're saying, help us with our pledge drive. We need to get some money to keep the lights on. But I don't know. We'll see what happens. Guys, let's switch gears for a second and talk Apple. So obviously, you can't pay enough money to see Steve Jobs return. He will not be coming back to the Worldwide Developers Conference in June, as many had speculated previously. Instead, the press conference will be highlighted by Phil Schiller, the Senior Vice President of Worldwide Marketing for Apple. Now, a lot of people are saying that this isn't a huge deal. Some people still would rather see Steve Jobs at the helm. Brian, what's your take? Do you think that is Steve Jobs crucial to be at this press conference, or are people still kind of like, take whatever?
I mean, I wouldn't count him out completely yet. You know, we're also hoping for that famous Apple one more thing at the end of the conference. They didn't say he's definitely not showing up. They just said that he won't be giving the keynote. I do think, however, that he is still a huge asset to the company. And you know, and they have kind of been hiding what's been going on with him, you know, specifically in terms of his health problems, for fear that that their stock will plummet if anyone finds anything out. I think he absolutely is a giant asset, not only because of what he brings in terms of, you know, the technology of the company, because that's a lot of people are involved in that, but he's really the figurehead, and people get as excited to see him as they do the new iPhone.
Yeah. I mean, Harry, he's not going to show up for the whole thing, at least, with his black turtleneck, his Levi's, and his, you know, specific sneakers. But behind the scenes, he's still involved. People are saying that, you know, he's still making decisions. He's not traveling all over the world micromanaging manufacturing, say, for example. But he is still, you know, heavily involved in decisions. With something like this, where it's a public face thing that Steve Jobs has typically been doing, do you think that, you know, he needs to come back to that role after? You know, after WWDC, he needs to come back and be the front pitch man for Apple.
Well, he's the greatest showman on earth in a lot of ways, and Phil Schiller is not Steve Jobs, and neither is anybody else. I do think Apple's done a good job of, during this time, of continuing to roll out interesting products, and people are as interested in Apple stuff as they ever are. But there is a Steve Jobs keynote and every other keynote on earth which is not as interesting, and I'm sure Apple and everybody else will be pleased whenever it does happen that he takes that role back on. I do think that when he left on his leave, they said he would be coming back in late June. So with that timetable, if he had showed up for WWDC in early June, it would have been a surprise.
Yeah. When he comes back, though, do you think that he will need to maintain his role as the actual figurehead of the company, or do you think that they'll make him kind of the spiritual leader and maybe push someone like Phil Schiller or Tim Cook to the front?
Who knows? I mean, one thing we know for sure is someday there will be an Apple that Steve Jobs is not the CEO of, hopefully a long time from now, and hopefully they're thinking about how to make that work. And actually, Apple does have a whole bunch of really good people near the top, and you know, I'm relatively optimistic that at some point in the future, hopefully a long time from now, Apple will continue to do interesting things with Steve Jobs not performing the role he has in the company's history.
Guys, we're out of time, so we'll have to leave it there. Harry McCracken from Technologizer. It's technologizer.com. Thanks for being with us. Also, Brian Peter from PCMag.com. Thanks for being with us. We're out of time, and that does it for today's show. I'm Randall Bennett. We're on iTunes, we're on YouTube, we're everywhere, so try and subscribe to us and tell people about us. We're still really small, so help us out. We'll see you later.